Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Crawford, and welcome back to another monthly Microsoft Dynamics Nav Business Central webinar here with Intelice. My name is Stuart Crawford, and I'm on the marketing team at Intelice. And today we are joined by David Maxwell, who's going to come and talk about some cool stuff with Nav and Business Central. Before we get started with that, just a reminder that we are recording today's session, and the recording will be made available shortly through the Intelice.com website. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask your questions using the Go to Webinar control panel that should be located on your screen. And if there's questions, you can use the question pane and or the chat pane, which will be monitored throughout today's presentation. We are waiting for a few other people just to arrive. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started and be respectful of everybody's lunch hour here. Please allow me to introduce David Maxwell from our Intelice Financial Management Services team. And David's going to share some information with you starting right now. Go ahead, David.
Thanks, Stuart. This is David Maxwell. I work with Intelice, and so welcome to another Intelice webinar. And today's topic is security. So it's one of those things that's quite essential for any ERP system. You want to have it locked down, you want to have it secure, you want the right people in there. So I'm going to jump right into our agenda. We have a few things to cover today. I wanted to address three key questions you normally have, and then troubleshoot and show you how to troubleshoot. The first one is who has access to the system, a very basic question. And I want to show you the interface. Today we're going to use mainly the Windows client or the RTC client, but I wanted to show you some of the changes. We're going to work off of Dynamics, NAV, Business Central, and Business Central 365. So there's an on-prem version, and then there's this version that is for the web. You might nickname this thing Dynamics NAV 2019, but they're dispensing with the NAV label soon. So we're going to be calling it BC, which is shorthand for Business Central. So kind of get used to that terminology change. And this is what it looks like. This is the cloud version for Business Central Dynamics 365. I'm not going to use it today, but I wanted to show you, I will jump back to it later in the presentation. I wanted to show you there's a light bulb now, which represents doing a basic search in Dynamics. So we'll reference that later. This is the version you're probably using, and this is the RTC client. Then there's also, of course, the client used for tablets and other devices, but this is the one I'm going to work off today. So who has access? Access is determined by a list of users, and the main area for finding out this information is under Departments, Administration, IT Administration, General, and there's a list of what we're going to cover in the next couple slides: users, users groups, and permission sets. And a lot of times I just go up to search to get to these areas, so I don't have to worry about where it is in the menu. But I wanted to show you that. So once you do access a user, the user list, you'll see who has access. And it basically is listing off the individuals. So here I put in a few people. I just came back from a trip to France. So I got France on the mind, and I've got a few other people that are logged in. So basically it's just a list of who is in the system. And different users could have different means of accessing the system. So another thing that you would ask yourself is, how do they have access? Through what authentication authority do they have access? And there are three types, which I have here. First is the Windows authentication, which I find to be the most commonly used, and that is for those users that are in a Windows environment. They already have a login through Active Directory. And that login can be used, leveraged, and brought in as a Windows user name. So the authentication of Windows is the means by which they authenticate also into Dynamics or BC. Now you see the second is something called Business Central Password Authentication. This is authentication when you are using a user name and login, And that is for environments where you might not have Active Directory or a lot of different domains. That gets confusing to try to maintain a Windows authenticated environment. So maybe you're on some other operating system like Linux, or maybe you are authenticating outside of the network. And so you're off-prem, for example, you're outside and need to go through a firewall to access nav. So you would have a password authentication here. And then lastly, there's the Office 365, which most people are moving their Office, like Word and Excel and so forth, off to the cloud and doing subscription services for those tools. And nav is no different. It's just, you could start to subscribe to it and get it off through Office 365. And then you would basically authenticate through Office 365 for the cloud to get to your access for NAV. So these are the three types. And another type of accessibility is what license type does the user access. And this is probably for those that are maintaining nav or maintaining BC with the annual renewals and maintenance and so forth. They would be familiar with the fact that there are a finite number of licenses available, so there's a finite number of users. So if you bought 10 licenses, then basically 10 users can use the system at one time. But there's another way that can be purchased. It's called a limited user, and that is a person that doesn't access the system very often, maybe your CEO or somebody like that. You come in, would give them a login, but at a limited user basis, which gives them access to 3 tabs or tables per session. So then there's 3 other types of license types. I haven't personally seen them come up other than the Windows groups, but there's a device. You can have a user as actually a device instead of a person. That's for handhelds, such as a scanning gun, such as that. And then there's Windows groups. I do have a client that uses Windows groups. And what that means is that you are using Active Directory's Windows groups to provide the security, and then individuals don't have their own security. They inherit the security through Windows groups in Active Directory. And this is something you have to work with your NetAdmin on. I've only seen it in larger and more complex network administrative environments. And then there's external user, which is not a user of the interfaces, is more of a system type of user. And I have personally never set that one up, but it's, again, wanted to bring it to your attention that there are types of licenses that restrict the ability to access or are an important part of how a user accesses. The next thing is really what can each person access in the system. And there's a nice new feature in BC that's called the effective permissions. It's on the menu of the user table or user card, and it will tell you what the person has access to in full. I'll just go into nav now, and I'll use my search. I'm going to type in users, click users, and here I am, exactly what you saw on the slide. Now I'm in nav showing the same thing, and I've highlighted my name. If I hit effective permissions, it's calibrating, it's calculating out all the permissions, and here they are. So to read what this means, you look at the object type, and object type data is the only one you will ever really need. It's what tables you can write to. There are other object types that I can show on a different table. This one I can't drill down into, but I'll show you those other object types, but they aren't used very frequently. The other type is each of the tables, that is, has a name. And so we see payment terms, currency, etc. And sometimes it's human readable and you can easily figure out what each of these are, and sometimes it's not. It takes time and practice, a lot of experience to know exactly what all these tables hold. And to this day, I don't know what some are. I'm looking at this batch processing parameter. I have no idea what that table's for, but it's there. And so one of the things is we'll go through a troubleshooting exercise in a moment so that you can get an idea of how to fix this if you don't have enough permissions. Then we have the common RIMD. RIMD is RIMD, common data access types of information. A read, insert, modify, delete, and whether it's yes or no. And you see there's an indirect that normally means that you have, you have the ability to insert something into this table only through some kind of process. So it's not, you're not able to go directly to a GL entry and type something in, for example. All right. So I wanted to show you that permissions have special organization to make it simpler to manage. Because if you're just going to use the large permission list that I showed you, it's going to be kind of unruly because permissions are more effective if they're bundled. And so there's two ways of bundling permissions. One is through permission sets, and the other is a higher level of order, which groups permission sets called user groups. So I'm not going to touch user groups just yet. I'm going to start with permission sets. And if you see this slide here, I've got my name highlighted. And over in the fact box, it shows me what permission sets I currently have. I have two, one D365, something or other, and super. Super happens to be the permission set that provides me access to the entire system. So I can see everything. So here I am back. I'm going to escape out of this effective permissions list. And you see I have in the fact box, I've got some permission sets. And I can also get to all the permission sets from the menu. If I want to drill into the permission sets and take a look, I can come through here, select advanced, or I can come up here and it'll give me an entire list of permission sets. And Microsoft has provided a whole lot of human readable permission set names that are intended to give you the idea of various bodies of work. So here we got bank recs. So you can see that that's what that is for editing bank recs. And here is for editing bank deposits. And then some is just for reading posted bank deposits, and here's just for reading posted bank recs. So whoever gets these wouldn't do the work. These people have the edit capability would do the work for those two activities. And if we scroll through here, we'll see that there's a bunch of different types. These new ones are for 365. We at Intelice are still working through what a lot of these new permission sets are for, but they're specifically for the new cloud version that they've added. If I scroll through here, FA stands for fixed assets and GL for general ledger activity, inventory activities, INVT, job related activities, manufacturing, purchasing and payables, resources, sales and receivables, and there's service management and warehouse management. So there's a lot of different things. They have a nice little prefix that I've used over the years. I'm quite familiar with all of these. You'll find these in your system as well. And what's new in this version is this column that has a type for the permission called system, because these are coming originally from the software vendor, versus the types that I've created manually, which is here, user defined. So user defined will give you the ability to know what you've created versus what came with the system, which is a nice added thing. There's also extension related, and extensions is a whole different topic I'm not going to get into, but there is an extension type of permission set. So the permission sets are basically bundles of permissions. And so if we go back into this one for editing recs or reconcile bank recs, I can click the permissions button at the top, or I can even just view over in my facts box on the right and I'll see that it contains the bank account ledger, check ledger. It doesn't tell me I can read or write into these things, but it does show me what's included generally. If I want to see what to read or write, I'll click the permissions at the top, and this is more specific on this permission set. I got the permission set name, and I see that I have read only on the bank account. So it's not giving me the ability to edit the bank account with this permission set, just the ability to read. And you see there's a bunch of those. But down here, I've got 4 different tables that I can actually modify, insert, and delete in as a result of having this permission. So that's the bundle of permissions. So again, permission sets are bundles of permissions. And there's another way of bundling permissions, and that's user groups. User groups, I think, been around an earlier version, but they're normally used at larger organizations that have a lot of security challenges, and they want another way of organizing their permissions. And so this is a higher level grouping. On the right, you can see that this D365 accountants user group bundles the permission sets here, local, and these 3. So that's what it basically is doing. It's giving you a control at a higher level to apply these permission bundles. So once we have that, we're going to want to add them to user cards. And so those are on the user card, and we have 2 tabs, user group and user permission sets. Get back into our, I'm escaping back into our users. Our user card this is our user list. So we need to go to the user card, and I just double click. And here I've got my own account, and we can see that I have these 3 permission sets. I scroll in here, I don't have any user groups. So that's an option. You don't need a user group. That is something that is only if your organization wants to do security with that. But I have set up an example of security, different types of security. So if I go into Francois the First here, I will see that doesn't have super user, just has 4 different types of permission sets, and he can only work in Canada. So this is an interesting point. You might have a company or multiple companies, and you want to give security at the company level, and you can do that. So I might add also that the user can do the same thing in Mexico. So I made it specific. If it's blank, then they can use the permission set across the entire database. And this user has blank user groups. Here we have a blank user group, no user group used. And then, so it gives you an idea. Here the person can use cash flow across the entire organization. And this person has a user group right there. Now I want to show you just a little quirk of editing when maintaining based on user group, that if I'm going to delete the existing lines, it doesn't want me to do it because it's linked to the user groups. See, it doesn't want me to edit the permission sets here because it's controlled by the user group. So what we'll do instead is that we'll remove the user group. And you see it automatically cleared out the permission sets. There are no permission sets any longer. And so maybe I'll change the user group to something else. So when I do that, it put in the 2 permission sets that are assigned to that user group. So how do you kind of do this? If you're going to be the ERP security manager at your organization, there are a lot of different ways of managing your ERP system conceptually. And, what should you do? Should you use permission sets only, or should you also add your user group? And it's really a matter of whether you are a small organization with kind of an easy security setup or a complex one. And if the more complex you are, I think the more apt you are to move to a user group to manage those complexities. But you have to keep in mind what the goals are, the security in your system. Number one is protecting your financial data and records. Number two is to hide your confidential data from other employees even. A lot of times you have sensitive labor rates in your system that you don't want certain people to be able to access and read, or whatever the case might be. You don't want them to have the ability to read it. So they have access to the system, but they don't have access to the tables to read the confidential data. And most important thing is the division of labor. Can't stress that part enough. A lot of small organizations just dispense with securing their accounting. Basic tenet of division of labor rules, which means that no one person has the ability to buy, and sell or do anything fraudulent in the system. So some of the basic accounting concepts around division of labor are to have an individual person on the AP side, a different person on the AR side, a different accounting manager that maybe can't enter the information, but they can process all the information, and then inventory manager, inventory control, and a bunch of others. But however you do it, it is worth stepping back and thinking about it. How do I best structure my division of labor rules within my security to prevent fraud? So I'm going to do a troubleshooting session. I'm going to go ahead and talk about how you correct for a user permission issue. One of the things I wanted to show you before I just launch into there is one little level of detail I haven't covered yet. Let me go back to my bank rec and the permissions related to bank rec. These system permission sets are no longer editable like they used to be, but your ones that are user defined are. So I'm going in. Oh, maybe that's not true. I see what's going on. Okay. We've got a little lock button on our icon, meaning that this is the ability to view or drill in and view permissions in a locked manner, not an editing manner. So I'm learning something new here about how to edit these permission sets. Let's see. All right, well, that's the thing about Nav and its new versions. There's always something new that you're learning every time. And here they happen to put a lockdown button that is on the screen here. And what I'm seeing here is, this is a non-editable screen. So they've got controls here. Let's see. Looks like we've got, maybe we can say no this time. They've changed this mechanism, this page, so that what you're doing is you are turning things on and off based on the menu header. So here I'm turning it on and off. Or I'll set it to indirect. Back to yes. See how it changed on the screen as I did that? So that's one of the things you can do. But when I was going into this, there was also this thing called the security filter. And this is for a higher level type of activity of partially allowing an edit or partially allowing a modifier, et cetera, based on the record, some kind of filter. Let me go back to the bank recs. And I say that in the dimension, let's see, get back into the permission sets. Oh, and now now I'm not in my own user defined one, and I have the inability to edit. You see, is the tab is gone. I'll go back to my demo one. Now the tab is for actions is there again because this is a user defined type. So that's going to be a little bit of something to get used to in the new version. So we have the security filter here, and this is like telling me that in the demo I have all access to all data type, but maybe I want to break that down a little bit. There's no fields in this one. Let me go to a new one. Let's see. No, that's not. Put in B. We just start in here with a new one. Well, let me get back to this. Obviously, clicked the wrong button. I'm going to move back to my slides now, as there's always a technical glitch with these types of presentations. So I want to talk about troubleshooting next, because one of the common things that occurs is that you will have a user that gets a message on their screen, and it will say something like the user has the inability to access the GL entry table, something like that. And so the first thing that a security administrator would do is, have that user send the screenshot, and it could be sent to us at Intelice. We support a lot of users that send us permission issues, or you can do this yourself. And this is how you would do that. Each table has ability to find the table, in other words, a table source that you don't have security for. I will go to a table. Let's say, I just go to the item table. And maybe they don't have access to the item table, but the security admin will. And they'll come in here and they can do Control-Alt F1. And it brings up about this page. And about this page will tell you the table's name and the number of the table. And sometimes this name that you see at the top, this one happens to say items, is not the name of the table. And so it's important to find the name of the table, because it's a table where you will have security, not the page name. So again, Control-Alt F1. You can see the page name is called item list, and then the table name is items. So I'd go back to my user. Not user setup. Not users on the menu. This one is blank, so it has users on the menu. All right, so users. And in here, we have a bunch of permission sets and the effective permissions. And let's see the permission sets. That are here. And I can basically, let's see, had the problem editing these earlier. Let's go to this one. So you see I've added one. All right. Now, what was that number? 27? So that's our item table. So our message was that, okay, they can't add an item. And here I am adding. It's not no, it's blank is no. So you get the idea. Now, the user will have to have this permission set. So let's go to, well, we're already at users. Let's say that Leonardo da Vinci didn't have access to items. Here's my permission set lookups. I just put items into this one. And so if I say OK, I put a permission set in here that has items in it. Now I hit the menu earlier. I'm going to expand the ribbon so that we can get to the menu. And I'm going to run effective permissions off of Leonardo da Vinci here and see if I've got the items capability now. So it's taking a little while to write that. Now here are all the, and Leonardo does have items. I showed this beginning of the discussion, the effective permissions. So what I mean by effective is that this amalgamates all the permission sets into one table of all permissions. So this gives you a holistic view of everything they have. So you don't have to dig into each and every different permission set or user group to figure out, whether they have a particular approval. This will do the work for you. And so I'm able to see here easily without going into permission set A that it's in the permission set. So, and then I can review the rest that they have in here as well. So a lot of people do something, I mean, that's troubleshooting, but a lot of people build their permission sets from the ground up. And let me just do that. I want to discard these changes. Yeah, I didn't do a change there. So I will create a permission set. I'm getting to commit. This is another way, just navigating around. I'm using the search for this navigation around. You see that I just created B. I just created B while I was kind of messing around and trying to figure out how the thing worked for a second. But I think I understood what I was doing wrong before. This little utility here requires you to edit the first line. It automatically set up the first line, and I didn't know I was supposed to do that. So here we go. I could now edit it. You see, when it was 0 initially, I was going to the second line and trying to edit the second line, and well, it hates me. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh back into that one. Looks like I created myself another dilemma. Okay, well, the delete worked on whatever that was about. So this is a new page. So there's maybe there's a few quirks. And then I can go ahead and come in, create another line, etc., and do this over and over again for all the tables that I want to. I did a double there until I'm satisfied. And then I could do this button here is read permission to all related tables. So this gives me the ability to kind of jump into, it allows me to cheat and get additional permissions to any child tables, to these particular tables. There's a parent-child relationship, and they're called foreign keys, and for people that know databases. And this is going to use this capability to populate additional tables in here. It takes the thinking out. You can get some additional ones put in. Let's see if I can get that to work. If I put in 27, 27 gave all these others because these are all child tables, or they have join tables into the item page, the item table. So you can see that all the read permissions were inserted. So a nice little handy feature to have is this little checkbox right here. And then on the item, I didn't get really too involved in the security filter before, but this allows me to get specific. If I want, I can basically give a filter saying that I have read access to only items that might be in a certain range. So you can put a specific security around the ability to read. So I put it around read, insert, modify, and delete. They can only do that range of items. And you can do the security filters around customers and vendors as long as you have some kind of nomenclature that makes sense to setting up security, you can do that. So yeah, that's security. And there is one other thing that I consider security as well, and should be considered when you're doing a division of labor, and that is the role center. The role center is what you see when you first launch Business Central, and it, defaults to your role center in your navigation pane, and it's on the home tab, and you'll see this label here. That's basically your role center. Older versions of Nav have called it the user personalization. Now, this one I'm showing here is the accounting manager, and the accounting manager will see certain things in its navigation pane on the ribbon, and you can see my last webinar on this, and Danica produced a nice webinar also on personalization in the last few months, so please go ahead and out there and look it up. I'll give you more information about what you can see on the screen. But Microsoft has provided some base role centers. You can create your own custom role centers, but this one is for what they think a general account manager would require. And this can be changed for any user. It's on their user card. And get back into a user. Oh, it's not on a user card. It's on the user personalization. So there's a list of users here as well that assign a user to a profile. Profile ID, user personalization, and role center are all kind of the same thing, confusing people. But user personalization is more than just the role center. You'll see it includes what language you might want to default your system into, and you can default into Spanish, Chinese, Norwegian. It's a little extra. It's not about security, but this is where you would change your profile ID here. If I hit the elliptical button, I can then choose another view, and I will do it here, AP coordinator. And you'll see if I jump back to the role center, I am still an accounting manager because I need to get out of Nav and then go back in. So let me do that. And here we're relaunching, and I should be my new role center. Here it already says I'm an AP accounts payable coordinator. So there it is. And so this is something to consider. All ERP security managers should consider having their role center conform to whatever their permission set or user groups are. So those people that are AP clerks get this one, for example, and they'll also get maybe the user group called AP clerk, which is a bundle of permission sets which have underlining permissions. And so this is all a good structure to have. This is the permission personalization. I mean, the role center is what they see when they get in. So one of your preventative measures for reducing error is don't give them the access to areas of the system they don't use. This doesn't prevent them from getting other areas of the system, but it's a good preventative measure is to get them their desktop clean and neat and tidy to the stuff that they use on a regular basis. So I wanted to show you that here in the cloud version, they have made this a little different. Now here's the role center for an accounting manager, and they've just kind of messed with this look and feel. It's not the same as it used to be in other versions of the cloud. They've kind of reorganized. They have these things called the queues on the left, and these are panels here. And then this is what you would have seen. Under actions is what you would see in the navigator pane, and then up here they have the menu. That's a matter of preference. I don't particularly care for this new layout, but it's something to get used to. It's not better or worse, it's just different. But it is easier to switch role centers in this version. They have this feature up here, setup feature, like an ordinary cogwheel in any website, and My Settings. And under My Settings, you can change the role center on the fly. So here it says I'm currently account payable coordinator. I thought I was account manager. I guess I'm account payable here. I'm going to go ahead and select account manager. Okay. And you can see that it instantly did it. It instantly changed it. No getting in and out of the windows like I did in the Windows version. This is automatically refreshes the screen and brings you to the new look and feel. On the other hand, when you are in Nav and you're changing security permission sets in the web version, you don't have to get out of the system for those new security changes to take effect. So remember, we were in permission sets, and I didn't say it earlier, but if I was in here and I made a change, it's instant. I don't have to tell the user, hey, get out and get back in. They can use the new security right away. However, if on the web version, the web version will require me to get out and back in because it caches the security. With this little light bulb, I can access the same spot, permission sets, and I can do everything I showed you earlier through the cloud version. But the permission changes that I make are not immediately effective until the user gets out and back in. So that's just a different behavior between the two. So that brings me to the end. I did want to bring up that previous webinar about personalization, because another thing that security administrators can do in the system is to modify role centers and to make them their own and unique for then to apply to the various users. And so personalization is a large part of that. And then there's next month, don't miss our next seminar, which is tips and tricks for using journals. I'm now available for questions. Here's my contact information if anybody wants to ask me a question.
And David, great webinar today. And just a reminder, folks, to watch your email in the next couple of weeks for the next invite for May's webinar. We'll have that out, like I said, probably the first or second week of May. David, we did have one question that came in during your presentation today. Stan wants to know if there's an ability to record permissions while a user does their work.
Yeah, there used to be a custom tool that allowed you to do that. I think there is a area that I encourage you to explore that allows you to perhaps do some recording. I think I just saw it while I was working in the system here. Let's see, if I go into the permissions actions, you see there's this record permissions start and stop button over here. So I think you're able to turn that on, go ahead and do some of your work, and then stop it. And it'll capture all of the table sets as you're doing that work right here. And so that's one way to build a permission set out. And that's really helpful, particularly for those people that have a lot of customizations built into their system.
Excellent, David. Thank you. Can you put your contact information slide back up? That ends all the questions that we had for today's webinar. You must have done a great job explaining everything. And once David gets his contact information up there, folks, here we go. Stay tuned for next month's webinar, like I said earlier. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to David directly, david.maxwell@intelice.com, or visit our website at Intelice.com. David, any closing points or things you want to add before we wrap up today?
No, I find that a lot of the smaller organizations don't have an assigned security person, and I encourage you to assign somebody to do that type of work and become the the area, the expert.
Wonderful. Good closing tip. Anyway, folks, thanks again for everything today. Thanks for joining in and taking your lunch hour with us. Again, my name is Stuart Crawford and David Maxwell with Intelice. And stay tuned for our May webinar. We'll be coming up very, very soon. Thank you again, everyone.